All right. So in front of me here is the Voyager. It is a very cute split ergonomic keyboard from a company called ZSA, and it's definitely one of my favorite keyboards that I like to have in my rotation. But what I figured I might do in this video is just go through a couple of upgrades that I've explored for this keyboard. I've done a similar thing for the Moonlander a while ago, and I figured there's just a couple of things that might be good to be aware of if you're interested in investing in this keyboard, because I've tried out a whole bunch of party tricks that I figured I might share. Now, the first thing that you can do when you buy a new keyboard is you can try and get new switches. And I've got this little bucket, basically, with lots of them. And I figured I might share just a couple of insights on them. When I bought this keyboard, I got them with Pro Red switches, and in general, there's no complaints there. It's a lightweight linear switch, not too loud, and stuff to like about it. But then I also started exploring other kinds of switches, and I was just kind of wondering if maybe there'd be a good tactile switch, because the Kale Browns weren't really just doing it for me. And then I went to this little website called SplitKB, and I found out about these Sunset Kale low-profile choc switches. That'd be this orange switch that I've got over here. I will say, these are totally better than the Kale Browns if you're interested in having a good tactile switch. At 40 grams, they're still relatively lightweight. And if tactile switches are your thing, I would totally recommend you go here. It could also be the case that you're just a little bit more interested in having a silent switch. Now, to my knowledge, we don't have tactile silent switches for these choc profile keyboards, but we do have linear ones. And in particular, I bought these ambient silent Kale low profile choc switches, and you have them in two varieties. You have them in the green variety, which is 35 grams of force, and you've also got this black one, which is 20, which makes them extremely lightweight. However, and this is the thing that you might want to know before you actually buy the keyboard, even if you have silent switches, that's not going to guarantee that the keyboard itself is going to be silent. And I think that's because of the keycap, if I'm honest. And I'll give a small demo. This board doesn't have anything extra besides the silent switches, and notice the sound that comes out when I hit the thumb key over here. It's not really silent. Now compare it to this one. There's a loud tick that's gone. Now, why is that? Now, as you can see, this is a very custom keycap. This is the keycap that you get when you buy the keyboard, and these are really bespoke. These are not the standard choc keycaps. Choc keycaps will be a bit smaller. But if I were to just have a look at what's happening here, it does seem to be the case that the keycap itself, when you, especially when you apply a bit of force, can actually hit the body of the switch. And my impression is that that actually can cause a fair amount of noise. So what is a potential remedy to this? Well, you can equip these keycaps with a choc, I think is what they call it. Let me just grab it out of the keycap over here. It's basically this little bit of rubber-ish plastic that's a little bit see-through, but it's meant as kind of a dampener or a silencer. And the way that you install it is you just put that onto the two grooves, and that goes nice and snug above the switch. And effectively, this is like just a dampener. It's like an O-ring, but for choc switches. And at least in my experience, that is the thing that you're going to want to get if you really, really care about getting silent. Now, if you're interested in getting that thing, you can just buy it as an accessory when you buy the keyboard. If you don't care about having the silent experience, then you can probably just skip it. It is only 10 bucks though, and I will say the shipping cost is actually quite substantial. So if you are at all interested and you want to be just kind of cautious, just be mindful that when you buy this keyboard, you might want to get those shocks. And just to do the sound demo one more time, I'm just going to hit a few keys on the silent board. There's still a little bit of sound, but now compare that to the non-silence board. There's definitely more sound coming out of it. So yeah, that's a small little roundup about the switches. Now comes another upgrade, and that comes in the form of this. This is a keycap tilting kit, but for choc switches. In a previous video that I had, I explored these for MX switches, but it turns out that the same provider of the tilting kit was also kind enough to provide me with a little demo for these choc switches. Full disclosure about that, by the way, I did not pay this with my own money, but I was definitely kind of curious and keen if this was going to make it more comfortable to use this keyboard. And to some extent, it actually might. But there's a little caveat that I do want to give you. One caveat is that these tilting kits are a little bit less flexible just due to the very nature of choc switches. As you can see over here, there are 2 holes, and that means that I'm also constrained in the rotation of the angle. For a normal MX switch, you can just keep turning it for 90 degrees and it's all just kind of fine. But if there is an angle that's intended for a specific key, then there's only one angle, and you cannot turn that 90 degrees to move it elsewhere on the board. And that's especially a theme for the thumb cluster. And that's a bit of a shame, because I do like to think that having just that little bit of angle for your thumb does actually make it slightly more comfortable. It is something I've just kind of noticed. Note, if you're going to go this route though, that you probably don't want to use the lightest switches out there. I have found that switches that are around the 20 grams of force, like these pink switches by the way, that those are actually very easy to accidentally trigger if you're using a tilting kit like this. Partially because this, of course, adds a little bit of weight, but also simply because I guess your fingers are just in a slightly different angle. But I think for your thumb, there's something to be said, I think, that your thumb doesn't necessarily like to do this. It kind of likes to do something that's a little bit more inward moving as well. So I have actually found that this slight angle to the inside, that's actually something that can increase the comfort just a little bit. However, that's actually not the intent of this tilting kit. The tilting kit is actually meant to cause a little bit of a curved structure for these keycaps themselves. So let me just go ahead and install that off camera. And there we are. Due to the magic of time travel, we now have a fully decked out Voyager board that is using the keycap tilting kit that I've got. So kind of as you would expect, you get this curved shape a little bit more, and the thinking, at least, is that this might cause less finger travel. If I hold the other board flat, you can kind of see that if I have to move my finger, it kind of needs to arch and then move that way. And you can argue if this particular keycap was just a little bit higher and a little bit more slanted, there would actually be less key travel that you might need. And if I were to compare the feeling of the board, I would definitely say that if I were to move my finger up and try to hit all of these keys, that is definitely true. It really does feel like you have to apply a bit less force on all of those buttons, so that's definitely kind of nice. Now, for the keys on the underside, though, I guess that's also kind of true, but there is this one awkward bit, which is that you do introduce a little bit of height. And the easiest way to compare is to just sort of put them next to each other, but you can see that, you know, you kind of triple the height if you introduce a keycap tilting kit on this side. So that does mean that your hand kind of has to arch over in order to actually be in here. And that does kind of work, but it also means that in order to hit this key, I don't know, you do lose something small there. Still definitely easy to navigate and doable, I would say, though. But then we get to the topmost row. Now, a few things about that. One thing is that you do get more wobble. I guess you can see it if I were to hold it up close, but technically the arm is longer on this side, so having some extra wobble there makes sense. The wobble on this guy really isn't that bad, but here you do see that it's just kind of noticeable. And there's also an extra thing. If you look at the angle here, the keycap itself really likes to be pressed at this angle, like so. However, the switch itself wants to be pressed down straight. And there can be a little bit of friction there. What I have found is that if you really intend to use a tilting kit like this, then it can actually help to have lighter switches on the top row compared to the rows below. I've just kind of noticed that if you just put a lighter switch there, it's a simple tick and you're done. And if you put a heavier switch there, there sometimes is this awkward moment when, oh, the angle's not quite right and the key press isn't fully registered. In general, the thinking behind these keycap tilting kits is that they might bring a keyboard like this a little bit closer to a keyboard like this that is properly has a key well. This is the Glove 80, by the way. The downside of these keyboards typically is that they don't offer you a way to switch the switches, whereas these flat boards, they typically do. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that doing this gives you the same level of comfort as doing something like the Glove 80. A proper curved keywell will actually have the angle on the switch itself instead of just on the keycap, and that will always just feel kind of nicer and more natural. It's just a shame that those keyboards don't allow for hot swappable switches. So my verdict on this is this can be nice if you're kind of in the experimental mode, but I wouldn't recommend this to everyone out there, and I've also found myself not really using this in the long run, for the simple reason that this also removes a very big upside of the Voyager. The Voyager is super cool because it's lightweight and easy to carry. It's just a small pouch in your backpack. But the moment you introduce this, you're not going to be able to put two of these halves together anymore. Like, that would break stuff eventually. And that means you would need to have a larger container. And kind of the whole thing about the Voyager that we like is that it's nice and small. So I think for me personally, I do really like this thing on the thumb though. Like, that's something I do think just makes it a little bit more comfortable. And it's not really a hassle to put that on there and remove it if I were to sort of move to a different office. If you're keen to explore it, that might be a place to start. Like, just consider the thumb switch, and if you go to the 3D Keycap website, make sure you get them in the right angle and also with the right rotation. Because again, you can't rotate these things 90 degrees as you can with the MX switches. So yeah, I'm going to undo this now, and then I'm going to talk about the final thing I wanted to talk about in this video, which is the tenting kit that you can get for this keyboard. So, the keyboard tilting kit. Now, this is an extra add-on that you do have to buy, but it is a pretty nice one. Effectively, the way that you're going to be able to do some tenting with this guy, which is the act of taking this keyboard and adding a bit of an angle, which, you know, in theory should be more comfortable for your hand. But the way that they do that is they just give you this block with strong magnets that you can just click under your keyboard. Then you can attach that block with whatever you like. You effectively have this one screw that can attach to any camera equipment that you might have. So that means you can do creative stuff with your desk, you can maybe have separate poles that just sit on the ground, all sorts of crazy things you can do. You also get a much longer cable that can connect both halves when you buy this. But I've really been having a hard time figuring out a setup that could work well for me. And then eventually I settled on this Manfrotto Pocket. This is basically meant to hold a DSLR camera. But the nice thing about it is you have these rubber feet together with these springs, which means that you can actually configure it in lots and lots of comfortable angles. And in this particular case, suppose I were to put it down like this, I can sort of keep on hitting it and it will just stay there. Now, one thing that also does help with that, I think, is the fact that I've got a cork mat here. The cork really prevents stuff moving. But I will say, in general, this is the main way that I've gotten tenting to work for this board. Partially because this way, I don't necessarily have to do too much with the height of my desk. I have found that if I were to do clamping, then I really need to make sure that my desk is up and that then the screen is down, and my setup doesn't really allow me to put the screen up and down real quick. So for me, this has been a fairly reliable way to just make sure I get whatever tenting degree that I like. You can kind of put it up way high like so. You can also put it down a bit more flat. A bunch of options are definitely possible here. I did find, though, that the next problem that you do kind of get is that your hands sometimes, they do want to rest. So I can put my hands down like so, and if I were to pick up my hand like that, you do get a little bit of an angle like this. It's subtle, but you can imagine if my hand was properly resting, it would have to be down below over here. And I do have to move it up, I don't know, what is this, like a few centimeters? So I have been exploring, like, what can I maybe do to help out in that department? And then on the SplitKB website, I also found these wrist rests that you can actually, if you place them just the right way, maybe you can also see them as kind of like this part of your palm rest, so to say. You do have to be a little bit careful because I think it can be comfortable to lean here. But if you go a little bit more down here, I do think you will hit either a nerve or maybe like block some of the bloodstream or something. But for short periods, I have found this to kind of work. You do get a little bit of extra height by doing this, and that just allows you to also rest your hands if you really wanted to. Another thing I do want to stress about this setup that is just really cool is, suppose now that I'm, I'm working, and at some point I'm done with work and I gotta go home. Well, then you can just yank the tilting kit off. It comes off easy, and this is just small enough to also just throw in your backpack, so to say. Maybe put it in a pouch, but that's definitely all good and doable. And yeah, that I think is a nice design and way to do it. You can definitely attach this to a larger setup if you want, but if you're on the go, which is sort of the design reason for this keyboard to exist, you want a keyboard that's nice and lightweight. It's just super nice that you can detach it. This is still like a small thing. Life is still pretty good, I would say. Now, if you're going to be using this board flat, I have also found another thing that can make this just slightly more comfortable, and that is that you can actually add some pads below. I also own a Digma Defy, and I got these extra magnetic palm rests. And as it turns out, they're actually kind of the perfect height to make up for the height difference here. So by just putting this under it, your hands actually rest at, I guess, like a slightly more comfortable height. And there's like a little bit of rubber down below here, so this is just not going to be moving anywhere either. Although it's not an accessory you can buy from ZSA, which is a bit of a shame, I can imagine having something that's just, maybe a centimeter thick, maybe a bit less, something like that. That actually kind of makes this a little bit more comfortable too. This is all, of course, personal preference, but I can confirm that this is also a nice addition and also something that you can just fold up and throw in your backpack, and life is pretty good. So yeah, these are some upgrades that I have considered for this board. The board is great. I really like the software that they provide you with this. I don't mind the attitude of let's keep everything wired. That basically means there's also no battery in this thing that can go defunct after a few years or something. So that's also super duper nice and good. The only thing I would say, like if this was your setup like this, no tilting, no tenting or whatever, the silent key switches make it nice for the office. Having these extra pads are definitely kind of nice too. The only thing I think in hindsight I would have liked this keyboard to have a bit more of is just a little bit more aggressive pinky stagger. So you can see right here, this keycap over here, that's where my pinky's got to go. And I can put my pinky on it, but in order to do that comfortably, I kind of have to make a claw with my hand, so to say. And I have noticed with other boards that have a more aggressive pinky stagger, so this one, for example, this is the Elora, you can definitely see that the A and the S is like a huge distance here. But by doing this, my hand has to sort of claw way less, and I still find my hand having to claw when it's using this keyboard. And I kind of wonder if maybe, if the pinky was just slightly more down, if that might have made it more comfortable. But yeah, if that's the only thing that's wrong with this keyboard, it's still a steal. ZSA has a really cool blog as well that I do recommend. And yeah, like the only thing I might recommend the ZSA people to do on the short term is maybe see if they can have a more elaborate selection of switches. That would definitely be kind of nice too, maybe. But yeah, these are some of the upgrades to the Voyager. And yeah, super programmable, super nice keyboard. Love it.